The show's going to be a little different this season.
We are referring to this as game of the game. Well, the game is that there's a hat. In that hat, there are prompts. We do not know what these prompts say.
You and we both don't know what we're going to be talking about next episode. Cookie Pocket, the game of the game.
The game of the game of the game of the game of the game.
The game of the game.
I keep pulling all of the stuff Zach wants me to pull, and it's annoying me so much because I know that Mitchell and I have written prompts specifically intended to get Zach back, and Zach has dodged those
somehow. Yeah,
I mean, we did the Paul Blart thing, but it would have been a lot more fun if Zach was the one to pull that prompt.
I forgot I didn't pull that. That was the ultimate friendly fire, I guess.
My challenge still is to try to get Zach to use a mulligan. I don't think it's going to happen, but anyway, we are talking about, I was going to say Parasite, which is not the title of this film.
No.
The title of this film is Possession, but I think the reason I was inclined to say Parasite is that image that probably landed it on the video nasty list, which was Zach's prompt.
Yes.
I'm assuming that the peak grossness scene of Isabelle Adjani copulating with a strange creature is what landed this on the video nasty list.
That's no way to talk about Sam Neill.
That's a Jurassic Park guy.
See, this is the thing about the video nasty list, which I'm glad we're kind of jumping right into, is that, and I feel like this is often the case with moral censorship. First off, kind of an intro of the video nasties for listeners who might not know. In the 1980s, during kind of the peak of Thatcherism, this conservative wave sweeping Britain, and to some extent much of the Western world, in Great Britain there was a great moral panic over home videos and films that young people could potentially see on VHS or Betamax tapes. And this was spearheaded by like conservative media pundits, like Mary Whitehouse is a particular one. She was the head of an organization she created called the National Viewers and Listeners Association. And she kind of made herself important just by complaining a lot and very publicly. And she'd been doing this since the 60s. She was a major opponent of like Doctor Who when it was on as well, for being too violent and frightening for children.
So that's how she earned your ire.
A little bit, yeah. But the Video Nasties list essentially was published in conjunction with the British government, and which was 72 films that video store owners and people who sell videotapes could be prosecuted for having available to purchase or rent. But the list doesn't really specify why these movies are objectionable. Some movies were later passed without any cuts. That was the dropped 33, which Possession was one of those, where the filmmakers appealed, and I guess the censorship board, the BBFC, went, well, I guess so. And then there were other films that were never passed with any edits that were considered too objectionable. But there's also movies that are on the video nasty list where there doesn't appear to be really anything violent in them at all, that have a similar title to another movie that's very violent. And so it was thought a mistake was made there. It was all fairly slapdash and kind of just vibes based, which I think the ultimate point of a lot of moral censorship is it's not really based on any like strict guidelines of what qualifies as such and such. It's kind of just something that an individual person or group finds objectionable and wants to make everybody else's problem. So a long answer to, I don't think there's a specified scene in this that made the censors go, this is nasty, we don't want it in stores. I think it was just a general vibe of, ew.
Yeah, we could get easily drawn into a long conversation about obscenity law in general and sort of First Amendment issues. And an iconic quote from a judge from a famous First Amendment case that concerned obscenity was the judge said, "I know it when I see it," which is, of course, not very helpful in terms of ascribing
Is
guidelines.
that admissible?
Yeah. So it's interesting to hear that, and sort of amusing to hear this historical concern about what people might be exposed to in the home, because with the advent of the internet, that's all just like, there's no hiding anything anymore. So it's interesting. I think we all more or less agreed about how good this film was. We all gave it the same score, but I will say I had spent a lot of the past couple days since watching wondering what Mitchell's reaction was, because I remembered I went back to our Marriage Story episode, and I sort of remembered how Mitchell reacted to some of the very like over the top emotional moments in that film. And there's a lot of that here. There's a lot of
every scene in this movie.
Yeah. and so I was wondering if Mitchell was like sitting there stone-faced or sitting there laughing or just not having a good time. So Mitchell, what did you make of that?
To be honest with you, I'm always going to bring it back to Silent Hill.
Oh, okay.
There's a lot of it's never been directly tied. I did look into it just to see if there's any direct inspiration, but there's quite a few, like the dichotomies and doppelganger thing, although that's done in film quite a bit. There's a lot of psychological horror elements that are borrowed in the Silent Hill games, particularly the second one. But I think the context here makes a lot more sense to me. I think Sam Neill is a better actor than Adam Driver. I mean, hard to compare, but I think he's just much more convincing and suits the role a lot better. I do think the one thing that was always going to hold me back was the incessant screaming.
Sure.
And it's always going to be, it really is just that. Like, I was trying to think, oh, this is kind of overdoing it a little bit, but there's so much metaphorical value and senses of the dichotomy of the Cold War and the marriage and, you know, desire versus reality and trying to fit somebody into a mold and, you know, those types of ideas kind of being shown in a more, I wouldn't even, it's supernatural, but it's really just more of like horrific physical manifestations of your relationship trauma, which is what Silent Hill enemies are a lot like that. They're all like representative of different emotions that you have when you're having a crumbling relationship. And a lot of them are like sexual. So I feel like this film does it relative to the runtime modestly, relative to the subject matter and other films that do that, you know, like Marriage Story, obviously completely different direction. I don't think pursuing the tantrums in kind of a full raw close-up way is bad at all. I think there's a lot of investment and immersion that comes out of that. As a viewer, you're invested based off of the value that it brings and understanding what, like, you're just, everything's beyond, like, all the reactions are beyond, like, you're beyond upset, beyond crumbling, like, you're not just paranoid, you've like absolutely gone off the deep end like 100 times over. And that's good. That's like immersive and convincing. And the way that it's filmed, obviously it's very hysterical. It's like, you know, it's just like the cameraman's getting out of the way. Oh crap. Like, I gotta avoid this actor right now or this actress right now because they're going hard, you know, having babies in the subway or not being able to have a baby in the subway rather. And like those scenes are really memorable and horrific and traumatic to watch. I just think it's a little bit too monotone. I think it sticks on that emotion a little bit too much. And I think I prefer a little bit more subtlety a little bit more of the time. There's just not enough of a balance for me. I just think there's just a lot of going over the deep end to the point where it's like, I've gotten the message now, and now the scene is just playing out in raw, and that's it. And from a filmmaker's perspective, I can clearly see why that's really magnificent, and it really lends a lot of credibility to the production design. It lends credibility to the way that the scenes are actually filmed, and the way that like the out of focus and in focus is used a lot, like with the rocking chair is one of my favorite aspects. Once again, kind of like the delirium kind of way of like swinging around the room, trying to trace the actors' movements. And it's very much investing in their depiction of who they want to portray. And I just think that's really cool. But from like a narrative or like kind of keeping with the story standpoint, it's definitely a little bit much. And that's why I gave it a 4.
As similar as they are narratively in terms of like the themes and the ideas and the concepts they're tackling, I think this and Marriage Story ultimately and obviously come down to being completely different experiences as a viewer, because whereas Marriage Story is interested in telling a fairly realistic, insofar as a narrative film can be realistic, story about a breakup, Possession is very much kind of an impressionistic portrait of a separation. It's all about kind of just the feelings and kind of the mental state that comes out of that situation. And it does feel very personal because Andrzej Żuławski, who made the film, was going through a really bad divorce when he made it. So it's very much kind of a self-portrait, and a lot of that does seem to be based in just pure feeling and an abandonment of reality. Everyone is the angriest all of the time, and the most panicky and screaming and paranoid, and everything is at an absolute height in this absolutely toxic relationship that needs to end and is going to like self-destruct horrifically at some point, and maybe does at the end in a way that metaphorically destroys the world. I mean, we can talk about how much of this is literal versus metaphor, but that does seem to be part of the implication of the ending.
Now, Mitchell.
Process.
Yeah. I think it's really interesting how their child plays into this story, both from a visual perspective and just on the page. I said in my review the two shots that stood out to me most in the movie, where there's one, I think it's when Mark comes home and finds his kid sort of really messy and neglected and kind of assumes care of him, but it may not be, it may be at some other point, but he's basically like takes the kid's shirt off and like holds him and just like looks at him very, very intently. And it's sort of this protective but also possessive moment, I think, of his kid. And there's like the identical shot maybe 10 or so minutes later where he's holding Isabelle Adjani, and you can't even really tell that it's her at first because the it's so close to visually identical. And I think it's interesting how that plays into this conversation of possession. There's this idea maybe that Mark's wife was possessed by the creature. I think would be like the most surface level reading of the title, but there's a lot more at play that I think works too.
There's lots to do with, I mean, Mitchell mentioned it, but there's lots that's just unstated in the narrative that involves duplicates and doppelgangers and doubles and mirror images throughout the movie. I think maybe not my favorite scene, but one of my favorite shots in the whole thing, just because of how unspoken it is a scene early on where they decide they're going to talk about their situation in a coffee shop, and the walls are all mirrors. So on one hand, the shot is impressive in that they managed to hide the camera despite this entire room being so reflective, but it's kind of like a corner in the room, and Isabelle Adjani is sat on one side, and Sam Neill is sat on the other, and he's dressed in gray and she's dressed in blue. And we see as the camera moves back and forth between them that at the far end of the aisle on Sam Neill's side, there's somebody dressed in blue, and at the far end on Adjani's side, there's somebody dressed in gray. So even in this shot, just in the communication of the way the extras are costumed and placed, we're seeing this idea of duplicates very early on, before anything like that is even introduced to the narrative.
I'm not noticed how people are dressed up half the time. Zach, I'm not gonna lie.
Yeah, I didn't notice that either.
That's just a couple guys, you know.
And that could be I think the very deliberate gray and blue thing,
that's an angle,
makes it a deliberate thing, but it could just be a curtains are blue moment. But either way, it does work, and they're in this space full of mirrors, so the concept of reflections is introduced as well. It does seem to be a very deliberate thing that Żuławski is angling for, this idea of the separation making people kind of the worst versions of themselves, spouses or partners trying to make each other into these sort of idealized versions of themselves, while also kind of desiring to take something away from that person that they don't realize is kind of a necessity of their identity. This is a man who is not going through a good time. It seems like a bad breakup. I don't envy the man.
Yeah, they're like, you said cut, right? He's like, no, keep it going. This is how it really feels.
Well, they apparently, that scene in the subway, they apparently did 2 takes of that. I feel like after the first one, I don't know how you do that again.
Her voice would be like Axl Rose now. That would be rough.
I don't know how anybody does that again. How does Isabelle Adjani get back up and go, okay, I'll do it again? How does the crew go, okay, all right, we'll do it again?
I hope the white stuff was like, I hope it was like ice cream or something tasty, something motivational.
I feel like we should explain what happened there.
We're just like, this sounds horrible out of context.
It's horrible in context too. I think there's this implication that she's basically suffering a miscarriage, and she says something to that effect to Mark at another point in the film, and it's, I don't know. I guess I would commend Żuławski's, even though it's in the horror genre sphere, I do think he does a good job of making things at least not one-sided in terms of who's in the wrong or who's in the right, in the way that this is collapsing, because Mark is really just completely left in the dark for most of the movie as to why she's leaving him and all this and that. But then, of course, when you see these supernatural elements at play, how on earth could she tell him any of that and expect to be believed? And you see this crazy moment of intense physical suffering where there's just nothing she can do about it. And it all plays and it all hits hard. I do think I have to somewhat side with Mitchell. I think there's a lot of like monotone shouting. And I think if it doesn't necessarily ruin the movie or break a scene, it does at least lose its impact on me. I'm kind of waiting for the scene to be over or something to change. But I understand its function, and I think the actors at least play it well.
I can understand that argument scene to scene, I think. But I do think in terms of the image that the entire film is painting, it would lose something, I think, if you got any sort of an impression of these people being able to cooperate with each other, or if you got any kind of an image of this relationship having once worked or been good in some way. I think the really bleak portrait that the movie is painting, and maybe that's not a portrait that you think works or you think is good, but I do think for the portrait that it's painting, you can't see any moment of these two people having an ability to communicate with each other. I think the closest they get is an incredibly weird moment early on where Sam Neill has just gotten home and he's eating an apple while Bob takes a bath, and Isabelle Adjani is like cooking dinner or something, and he says like, "Come, observe him," and they watch him like fake scuba diving in the bath, and it's just, even that, like, I guess in context you could say that's kind of maybe a nice moment, but it's so cold and bizarre, and Sam Neill is also so distant and cold throughout the whole film that anything that would feel affectionate just feels kind of creepy coming from him.
In your portrait, Zach, I'm just asking not for a corner with the sun and the sun rays. I'm just asking for less gray. Okay, you can have all the gray and black that you want, but just use less of it. That's all I'm saying.
I suppose.
And like I said, I mean, there's a natural rawness to everything, and no scene, it doesn't feel like it's being overplayed. It doesn't feel like the scene's going on for too long, like in and of itself. It just feels like the emotional impact has run its course, really is what it comes down to. And I can see why there wouldn't be any like happiness or anything. Like I said, like I don't think there needs to be like ups and downs necessarily, especially at like this stage or in a lot of stages at relationships when it's just hit the point where it's like it's only toxic from that point forward. Like there's no, like anytime they talk or interact, it's gonna go bad no matter what. And that's just how some people are. And I think with this, because they stay on that bleak side, they can at least explore the deception. They can explore the lying and the subtlety through that way. I also think, though, in that same breath, it's difficult to hang on to that subtlety for so long when you have somebody screaming for like 8 minutes about the same thing. Even though that screaming is very well acted and very, very convincing. And it could be a job in and of itself how often she does it. But I noticed that I'm putting on Miss Stackhouse, I'm putting on the feminist lens, Miss Preston, everybody, I'm coming back, right? Yeah. The feminist lens is returning.
We'll get it out of the Pelican case, put it on the camera.
Right. Yeah. Every male in this is emasculated, like, tremendously. And I think that is extremely interesting. I guess you could say something like the cops and his job maybe a little bit, but for like the main characters and the ones that actually have like important dialogue are like heavily emasculated to the point where you feel the sense of control and desire a lot more, because there's no like all the physical impositions they try to impose on her and on each other result in like nothing. They're like bursts of nothing. But when she is emotive and she is expressing her desires and needs, it like envelops the entire scene. It disgusts all of the men. It makes them not want to be a part of it, and they kind of crawl into their shells. And I just think her influence as a character is very much felt differently, and that you can clearly tell that the supernatural bits and the possessive metaphor and the possession literally is like way more stronger with her. So I just think, especially with the scenes with Heinrich and Mark.
Oh yeah, Margie too.
And Margie too. Margie, sorry, R.I.P. But Mark and Heinrich, like the way that they interact, and then the investigators, they're both, you know, there's very much a homosexual kind of undertone to the way that they interact, and I just think that it really sends home how they try, but in reality they're powerless over how she feels whatsoever. But all of these false like impositions, like you can't leave, I don't want you to leave, those are like some of the most powerful moments of the whole film. And it just, every time you see her and someone else in the room, even if it's a tentacle guy, she is like in charge of that room, regardless of what happens. And I just think that's super interesting that was kind of turned up to 11.
Well, maybe it's time we address the tentacled monster in the room, because we haven't really talked about it that much.
Not there.
Because throughout the film, Mark realizes or is told that his wife is having sex with this other man, and at first we think it's Heinrich, who's this very, I think, very funny, but like flamboyant lover man, who always has about 8 buttons undone, like somebody else I could mention. And eventually, though, we learn that although she did have an affair with him, the person she's currently having an affair with is a slimy tentacle monster man in an abandoned apartment on the other side of town that throughout the film becomes more and more humanoid until at the end it becomes a duplicate of Sam Neill himself. So what do we think the tentacle monster is? Is this a literal tentacle monster? Or is this, what do we think it's a metaphor for?
Well, of course it's figurative to the same extent that the whole movie is figurative, you know, and just a genre-ified exploration and portrayal of a relationship ending. But I think it's interesting how Mitchell said just now that she is always in command of the room, even with the monster, because maybe instinctively that was not my initial read of the scenes with the monster. But I think Mitchell has a point there. I think, speaking broadly, maybe the suggestion is that the monster is not so different from Mark were it to be possessive of her. I'm really reaching here. I'm not sure I have like a neat little theme statement or message. I do think it works, and I do think on a basic level it communicates enticing themes about relationships and the horrors that we go through, even if they're not through a tentacled monster. I think it's probably most unsettling when Mark sees it, and it's like all monster except for it kind of has like the beginnings of a human head, and you see like a head of hair, and there's something about that that's to me much more unsettling than if it were just all monster.
I think the nail in the coffin that confirmed my suspicion that she was in charge of that situation was the duality of her saying almost, and she's looking at him, but the monster like almost, you know what I mean? he's doing Japanese pornography things and implications there.
No.
But she's looking at Mark saying almost, like you were almost, like either you're almost but not good enough, or I'm almost to who I want to be but I'm not there. There's like, I feel like there's different ways of looking at it, but I just feel like her desire and emotion always has the upper hand, and it's what takes everybody down basically. Now it does produce this new Mark guy that's could be, you know, like the Godzilla reboot could be, you know, crazy ending, like, oh, it's a sequel now, you know, that type of deal where I don't know if anybody knows what I'm talking about, but it's like the end of what the hell it's called. Now I'm blanking on all of my Godzilla movies now. One of the one that just came out.
Godzilla Kong movies where they have like the duplicate Kong and the duplicate Godzilla, or
no, that's a good one, but I'm thinking of the wow, my dad
-1
so upset with me. Yes, -1, the end of -1, where it's like, wow, that came out of nowhere, just a whole other supernatural thing happening. But anyway, yeah, I think the tentacle monster is just the physical manifestation of what the desire of her desire of him to be would be, and it's finally turned into like it's an actual person at the end. I think would be the immediate assessment that I would have, which is done in Silent Hill, by the way. Of course, there's Mary, which is also a biblical analogy, and Maria, and Maria is like the sexual ideal of what she would want. It's like the same thing. I'm done. I'm sorry. I'll stop.
No. That was great. I'm totally sold on
Christian will play Silent Hill 2. After I watch Andor, we'll play Silent Hill 2.
Yes, we've reached an agreement.
Yep.
I'm totally sold on the idea that Adjani is like in control or in the position of power. I think there's still the suggestion though that this creature is not just another person or just the next man to come along. And I think maybe this is where Żuławski's personal experience or a stake rears its head, because when the Mark doppelganger appears, his eyes are pitch, and there's just like, to me, there's just nothing human there. He's like an empty vessel or worse. And there's this, the absolute closing scene is their child running away, telling the teacher, who looks identical to his mom, which is a whole thing we haven't even mentioned, but is a big part of the movie. He's telling her, don't answer the door, don't answer the door. So there's this sense that the Mark doppelganger is like a manifestation of evil that is interesting. And maybe, I don't know what that says about Adjani's guilt and the relationship falling apart, or if she was like corrupted by an outside thing. But there's clearly a lot at play here, and a lot of ways to think about it and deconstruct it.
Clearly, Dark Mark is going to become the president of the United States. We already know.
Yes.
An Omen 3 sequel.
But he'll go to Westminster Abbey first and get stabbed in the back. I'm glad you mentioned the teacher. I think the teacher's name is Anna. Helen. Okay. But I'm glad you mentioned that, Christian, because she's different in that she has different hair, and she also has these very distinctive green eyes. And when the monster eventually has eyes, its eyes are also that same shade of green. And apparently a duplicate Mark in the stairwell also had those same green contact lenses in, but the way they lit it just didn't show up right. But there clearly is a duality there, of this monster evolving into something that parallels Helen. And I think because you've got these two kind of duplicate people at the end, I do think there's a sense of Helen being Mark's kind of idealized version of who he would want, if he could take all the bits and pieces away that he doesn't like, because there are conversations that they have that deliberately parallel conversations earlier in the film where people are screaming and grinding up hamburger in very alarming ways that are just had very kind of passively when Helen shows up. They're direct parallels of each other, but with Helen, those conversations are easier, and they're just able to talk to each other. And I think similarly, there's the idea that the monster, as it eventually evolves into a duplicate Sam Neill, is kind of the idealized version of who Mark would be if she could take away all the bits and pieces. And so but I think the ultimate ending is, even when these two people have the opportunity to meet, to be together, as Bob kind of forecasts, it's still not going to work, because making these idealized versions of each other either won't last, or is just going to lead to further issues, or those aren't the real versions of them. Which I think could be true for Żuławski's relationship. Maybe his takeaway is ultimately just, this needs to end. There's nothing left to salvage. We can take time and try to perfect ourselves, but even if we get back together, we'll just end up right back where we started, or maybe even worse. And maybe that applies to, as a global message for relationships, or relationships that aren't working in general. You think you can primp and pluck and adjust and trim at a person to make them the idealized version of what you would want from them, but you can't and shouldn't do that. Because that's a form of control. That's a form of attempted possession. That isn't right, I guess.
Yeah. I think the title of this movie is very intentional in more ways than one. It's interesting to think about the extent to which Anna made the creature become the duplicate Mark, whereas Mark sort of just happily stumbles upon Helen when he's taking his kid to school. And yeah, I see how broadly influential this was on horror even now. The sexual elements were obviously an influence, I think, to Eggers's Nosferatu that came out last year. You really see a lot of that in Lily Rose Depp's performance. Yeah, it's interesting. There's so much to think about, and my perspectives have changed a lot just in the past half hour. But I still feel like my viewing experience was not as enlightened as our conversation is now. So I guess what I would say to prospective viewers is to have patience and to really treat this like an English class, even more so than usual on this podcast, because there's, especially for my base level of consternation towards horror and intense themes, there's quite a bit here.
I feel we're kind of wrapping up the talk on Possession. Before we go, I do want to mention that there's kind of this unusual, and I think you could maybe even say unnecessary, spy angle to the movie as well. There's an obvious visual metaphor of the film taking place in Berlin, right next to the Berlin Wall. This clear divide between people, between politics and regions, and just a division between two people in this relationship. But Mark's character, it's a necessity of the story that Mark spends a lot of time away from home because of his job. But the way that that's achieved in the narrative is that he's not like a banker or a politician. He's a spy. And we don't really find out who he's spying for or what his objectives are, but that comes back to bite him at the end. And there's a flurry of gunfire and a lot of very unsafe motorcycle riding. And I guess, did that work for you guys? Or did that kind of feel like it came out of nowhere and meshed unusually with the rest of the movie?
Christian.
Okay, fine. I think Possession jumps the shark in terms of believability so early on that, and this isn't even a roast. I just mean like the level at which this is set. I don't think it struck me as out of place or far-fetched. It was fine. It didn't even really register to me as it was happening because I was so wrapped up in the monster and the central conflict. It's another way in which we can think about how Mark treated that relationship and the skill sets necessary to be a spy. Of course, emotional manipulation is like probably the most important part of that job, and seeing what you're not supposed to see and hiding things from others. I think it works fine.
Yeah, imagine hiring a private investigator as a spy. That's so weak. Beta. And then the investigator's lover also gets murked too. R.I.P.
Yeah.
I think I'm right there with Christian. I was not like thinking, oh well, that just doesn't make any sense. That makes no sense. Like just tentacle monster is fine.
I'll mention that I think I largely agree. It doesn't grate for me. I didn't find myself thinking, oh, but I need to know who Mark is spying for. But yeah, I think the end of the movie, Żuławski is trying to establish this sense that the center cannot hold and chaos is ramping up. And the spy twist is kind of a necessary part of that happening. You need people to be going after Mark for everything to kind of go wrong in the way that it does, which contributes to the climax. And after, I think it was after Roger Moore left the role of James Bond, Sam Neill actually auditioned for James Bond. So at the end of this movie is a weird little preview of what a Sam Neill James Bond movie might have been like. Do we want to pivot to Week in Review then?
Sure. I will just say the electric knife really freaked me out. There's a lot of nasty stuff in this movie, but that probably got me the worst. And there's this one scene where Anna breaks and smacks Mark, and it's like glass shattering, but then Mark like relishes in it, and he's like, now I get to beat you up. And it's like awful. Those two moments. There's a lot of shouting, there's a lot of bad stuff, but those two are the ones that really stick in my psyche. Yeah.
Also want to mention the score.
Yeah.
There's some subtle moments with the score, although a lot of the film is, I think it's silent. I don't know. I'd have to pay attention again, but there's parts of it that are like, it's like a low hum or like during transitions between scenes, kind of just sets the tone pretty well.
Yeah. Who's going first?
Now,
I don't know what I'm talking about.
I'll go first.
All right.
Boom, coming out the gate. Do 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 do. What is that? Do do do. It's not an AR-15 or related rifle hanging above a house that says 217 on it.
It finally happened.
Oh,
But it's actually a bunch of little kids. That's it. It's a bunch of little kids. Shouldn't have let me cut your hairs, kids, because you're cooked now. I got your ass. Just give me a bowl with water in it and a thorny stick, and you're cooked. That's it. So, first of all, I didn't know what this movie was gonna be. I had to go to the bathroom like the last 20 minutes, and I was just like, I'm not doing that.
All right, good.
I'm not doing that. I'm not getting out. I'm not gonna do something like be late for the first few minutes or anything. But what I will do,
I only missed like 20 seconds of the movie.
Roasted.
Fear of Dark. The George Harrison song was still playing.
Yeah, the little girl's monologue. Honestly, it wasn't super duper important. Like, obviously, yes, you don't miss the beginning, but like, you get the narrative very quickly. It kind of tells itself. And one of the things I really liked, I'm a sucker, Kubrick follow shots, but this time it's from behind the head. And I think that sense of perspective is super immersive. That comes out throughout the film, and I think that's really great. But yeah, I guess I would probably call it a horror film. I've seen a lot of reviews saying it's more like a thriller in a lot of ways, and I think the comedic beats and the way that they're played, it kind of lends a little bit in that direction. But like, we've talked about defining horror and what that means for quite a while, and I think just the general premise and the way that it plays out pretty much categorizes it as that, and I think there's a lot of flexibility in that genre description. But yeah, I was surprised by a lot of things. I don't think I liked it as much as most people probably did. I see the reason why there's a lot of acclaim, and I rated it a 4. I mean, I thought it was great, obviously, but I definitely was not affected to the point where I think the film wanted me to be, and I do think the comedy was a part of that. I do think doing Josh Brolin, John Cena moments and having the cattle or dogs, like the dog is chasing, whoever, like Austin Powers or the girls and whatever, like just the chase scene, Ferris Bueller. I can't think of any other chase or anything, but just those like wide shots of streets of people going places and chased and stuff is just, I couldn't take it seriously at all. Like it was just beyond ridiculous to me. And I do think the film does a fairly good job of like fitting that within the narrative. And it's not like, it's like, oh, well, I'm not going to take the rest of the film seriously. It's just those scenes, really. It kind of just drives the tone out the window, in my opinion. But with everything else, the perspectives are great. The acting is phenomenal pretty much across the board. Really no complaints at all with that. It's definitely hard to describe, which I think is a good like indicator of a good film, really. Either it's like really so crappy that it's impossible to put it into words how horrible it is, or it's just so nuanced and creative and original in a lot of different ways that it's hard to like convey. Like I couldn't really think of a film, like 2 or 3 other films that like accurately can compare to this one, and I think that's a really great indicator of an original horror film. It's really stressful. I think the witch thing is a very hard stereotype to work around in general in horror. I think number one is always going to be like possessions and priests and reading from the Bible, that type of stuff, because The Exorcist kind of just set that tone infinitely for The Conjuring and Annabelle and all that stuff. I've seen the Warrens so many times, and everybody knows who the Warrens are now. God, but But yeah, witches I think are very nuanced and hard to kind of pull off originally. And there's a lot of things that were not very original, like with the premise and everything. And you don't really get the motivation behind her and everything. A lot of the film's value comes out of the shock factor and the imagery, and really just how it's filmed. I think the cinematography is one of like the most important parts of the film that really makes it immersive and effective. And the storyboard, obviously, with the writing, just is really great. Yeah, I thought it was really good. It's not like groundbreaking. I don't think it's setting a new precedent necessarily, but I do think it's pretty good.
I'm like the meme of the guy sitting at the desk, like trying not
with
to
the
talk.
bulging forehead.
Yeah.
I will say, as much as the motivations of Aunt Gladys are not fully explained, Zach Kreger, I know you watch every Monday, but the rest of the surviving whitest kids you all watch on the same computer. That's why we only get 2 views. Please do not make the Aunt Gladys prequel that you've been talking about. It's not a good idea. Don't do it.
Yeah.
I trust Kreger with my life, dude. I don't care. He can do whatever he wants. And they do at least gesture at her like dying and siphoning off the life force of the kids.
I think that's enough.
So
I don't need to see a young Aunt Gladys.
Yeah.
Maybe I'll summon my weapons. I don't need to see that.
Oh man, that's so good.
I'm definitely I'm a bigger fan of subtlety. That's all it comes down to. I just wish
that's like the ultimate burn.
No. I'm not criticizing the film like because it needs to be more subtle. I'm just saying the only reason why that works, like why these kind of stereotypes of these people work, is because the acting is so phenomenal and they play those characters so well and they're so well casted. I think if it was anything else, like Josh Brolin is probably the least, and I'm not saying he's bad.
Agreed.
I'm just saying he's the worst cast probably, because a lot of people could have played that part, but he's just a phenomenal actor. And he has this gruff, assertiveness about him that contrasts with the other characters. So it works in that way. So
apparently that role was originally going to be, the mayor in Eddington. Yes, Pedro Pascal, which I don't think would have worked.
That would have been worse, probably.
I've recently been reading, because we're recording this quite close to Halloween. I've been reading the Amityville Horror, the original book, which James Brolin, Josh's dad, played the lead in the film adaptation of that. And I don't think this was deliberate, but it is interesting that both of those characters are guys who are head of like a construction company who, due to like traumatic supernatural events, part of like the pressure of the narrative is not just the supernatural things happening, but also like my business is failing because of the impact of these supernatural things. There's scenes in the original Amityville Horror where James Brolin is like talking to his coworkers like, yeah, man, I guess I ordered the wrong thing. I made a mistake, which basically happens verbatim in Weapons. Kind of interesting.
Man, I thought Weapons was like the best movie ever. It's still so weird to me that I like it so much more than these horror aficionados that are on this podcast with me.
I don't know about that one.
Yeah, dude. I mean, like, just even looking at like the past few new released 5 out of 5s I've given, I've thought about Weapons so much more than even like Oppenheimer or freaking Anatomy of a Fall. It's really, really lingered with me. Not necessarily because it's like profound or literary, but because of its unpredictability and its characters and cast. Anyway, I'll stop myself. I saw a new release. I went to the grid, except not really. Most of the time I was just here. And Trent Reznor and Atticus Ross were there, but they weren't just there as those names scoring. They were there as 9 Inch Nails, which is a distinction, believe it or not. I saw Tron Ares, which is being pretty much eviscerated by critics and most lay audiences too, which is interesting. I feel like Disney's kind of easy to pick on right now for a lot of reasons. Maybe you were mad about Kimmel or mad about Magic Kingdom costing $200. Yeah. No! Or you're mad about the sequel itis, which this is admittedly a product of to some extent. Mm-hmm. I thought this was a really fun, good movie in terms of being like a visual feast blockbuster film that's kind of empty calories. I quite enjoyed myself. I landed on a 3.5, and I would say it's closer to a 4 than a 3. Is that? I don't know. I really enjoyed it, and it's not just because of the Nine Inch Nails music, which is outstanding, and it's not all instrumental, and it's not all just full tilt industrial loud. There's some quieter introspective songs in the score that are very touching in quieter moments of the movie, and there are at least 2 songs that are sung by Reznor that are like proper Nine Inch Nails songs that are really quite good. I guess a common sticking point is that Jared Leto's not a leading man and was the wrong choice to helm this, but he's playing an artificial intelligence. He's playing like Mitchell's gonna be like, you better not say wrong tech things, and this movie probably does that. I don't think this has like an academic, holistic view of what AI is or what it means or what its applications are in the tech world or the military world or anything like that. I think it's pretty. Yeah, I think it's at least as generic as that, but. All you need to know is that Jared Leto is an AI, and then he's in Tron, and then he's in the real world, and stuff happens. I really like Greta Lee. She's in this. She's kind of like the Kevin Flynn, Sam Flynn follow-up, and she's fun. She's charming. There's a really interesting dynamic between Evan Peters and Gillian Anderson. Peters being the sort of villain CEO that recalls the sort of weird mother-son relationships in a lot of Hitchcock movies. I think Leto is good. I think he plays like a computerized being with a good level of ambivalence and sort of social awkwardness, and he has comic moments. And people that went into this expecting him to play a Byronic hero or like Han Solo or some nonsense like that, we're never going to get that, and that's not what the movie's going for. It's a visual feast. It doesn't spend enough time in the computer world, probably, because a lot of the premise is them like bringing Tron into the real world. There's a Jeff Bridges cameo that I guess is basically fan service and nothing else. It respects what happens in Tron Legacy, but it's not really like a direct follow-up. So it's kind of like fence sitting there. I had fun with it. I don't care for the first Tron movie, but I do kind of weirdly like the franchise. I like Tron Legacy. I liked this. I liked a Tron TV show that was on Disney XD when I was in like middle school or whatever. So I think there's fun to be had here, and it's a little strange to me that this got the beat down because I thought it was significantly more entertaining and original than even Fantastic Four was. And I think critics maybe sometimes need to choose something to pick on. But I personally don't think the criticisms levied at Tron Ares have been very thoughtful. I think there are ways to pick on it, but I think the common sticking points have not really met the mark for me.
I think it is down to the Jared Leto. And not even that people are like, oh, he's not playing the right kind of role. I think people are just sick of Jared Leto. As like it's a personality, as a presence in films. I don't even think you can lay it at the door of like a specific performance, although his Joker might have coincided with the beginning of kind of the dominoes falling. I think people are just tired of him and don't want to see him in anything. And so him being kind of a big central figure of this kind of franchise vehicle, meant that was kind of the death knell. Maybe he wasn't the wrong choice for the role, but I do think he was. I think I don't know how long this has been in development, but I think Jared Leto at any point in the past 9 years or so has been the wrong person to pin your franchise on, the wrong face to put on the front of your ship. I think we saw that from Morbius, even though that movie had problems that weren't Jared Leto. From House of Gucci, he's...
Oh, I loved him in House of Gucci. Come on.
You have hit the wall, Zach.
Yeah.
Society had hope when House of Gucci came out.
Just to illustrate how badly Ares is flopping, Morbius made more money in its opening than Ares did.
Crazy.
Wow. I don't think I realized that. Yeah. Yikes.
Now the real question is, I'm gonna pin you like a congressman. Just say yes or no. Just say yes or no. I'm gonna say, do you think Nine Inch Nails is better than Daft Punk?
Ooh.
Yes.
That's messed up.
Yeah, fair answer, Zach. The Tron Legacy soundtrack is also great, but I do think this one was even better.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
My answer kind of comes from not necessarily the scores. I haven't seen Tron Ares, but I like Nine Inch Nails more than I like Daft Punk just as a group. Well, I'm going to go in a very different direction. We've been very current. We've been very 2024, 2025 so far with the Week in Review. And so I'm going to take it all the way back to, I think, 1957, somewhere around there. Drive-ins are a big thing. To talk about William Castle's House on Haunted Hill.
That's a great
lead
one.
up to Halloween. So I've been watching all horror movies in October. I haven't watched one every single day because we've recorded for the podcast. I've had other things that I've been dealing with. But if I've watched a movie in October, it's been a horror movie. And Gloria and I just got back from a vacation to Sleepy Hollow. And our last night there in the hotel, we had some downtime. And so I put on this 75-minute little movie from the late 50s by William Castle, who's debatably the Alfred Hitchcock of schlock. And I'll say it, it's not a very good movie. William Castle is not very good at framing shots or even like guiding scenes of characters just talking to each other. And there are a lot of them in all of his movies. But there is something immensely likable about like all of his horror movies. And maybe it's just because I have an awareness of the gimmicks that he would build into the movies that he screened. So he made a movie called The Tingler, where at some point in the movie, a tiny little creature, gets loose in a movie theater and runs around under the seats. And William Castle would hook up specific seats in the theater with like buzzers, kind of like an ancestor of 4DX that would like buzz individual seats in the audience so that people would have like a kind of reaction during the scenes where the Tingler is running around in the theater in the movie. He made a movie called Mr. Sardonicus, where before the last couple minutes of the movie stops and William Castle comes out on screen and says, "All right, ladies and gentlemen, we're going to take a poll on whether you want to show mercy to the villain or show no mercy, and that'll influence the ending of the movie. So hold up the ballots that you received when you bought your ticket, and I'll count all of them. And okay, you agreed to show no mercy." Of course, they never shot a mercy ending, but it was just these gimmicks that were built in to give the movie this feel of interactivity, to feel as if it was more than just a movie. It was kind of a show that was being put on for the audience. In House on Haunted Hill, certain scenes were presented in Emergo, which William Castle touted as this new format, but really just meant there's an elaborate pulley system built into the roof of some of these movie theaters, and during specific scenes, there's a prop skeleton that the manager will wheel around above the audience. And so William Castle's horror movies, including House on Haunted Hill, have this very kind of like carnival haunted house feel to them that's very, very likable. A lot of them star Vincent Price, including House on Haunted Hill, who is a really good presence for these kinds of movies because he can make this sort of like bland drive-in fodder very entertaining, and he brings a lot of kind of like campy menace to it. So it's not great. It's a 2 out of 5. It has a decent premise. Vincent Price invites all of these people to spend the night in a haunted house where 7 people have died. And if you can stay throughout the full night, you get $10,000. Unfortunately, outside of a few scenes, it doesn't really live up to that premise. Now, it has great individual scenes. Castle knows how to shoot his scary moments. But then we go right back to 5 people talking in a room. And I think you can see how little Castle kind of cares about the characters, because the 2 romantic leads, they don't really have a romance, but you're clearly being teased that something might happen between them. Will they, won't they? One of them is like totally absent from the climax, and the male lead is literally locked in a cupboard for the entire thing. Like the climax happens, and then somebody goes, I got the latch. And he goes, finally I'm out. What happened? And that's like 3 minutes before the ending of the movie. So it's certainly not going to be for everyone. If you're looking for something dark and creepy and scary, it's not going to be for you. But I think it is a very good Halloween party movie. There's movies that are good for that, and I don't think that's an insult necessarily. You can take it as one, but it's a very good movie to have on in the background of a party. It has great scenes that everybody will be kind of noticing when they're on. And then when everybody's talking in the dining room, you can go back to having conversations or getting something from the punch bowl. So 2 out of 5 for House on Haunted Hill.
I know what I've been insulted. That's so much fun. It is a carnival, Zach, and you weren't invited.
I guess not.
You weren't invited.
I do like Mr. Sardonicus, and I really want to see Homicidal, which was his Psycho ripoff, because I'll probably cut this, but I just think it's fun to talk about. His gimmick for Homicidal was that right before the climax, there was a fright break, where if you were too frightened by the movie, you could leave the movie theater and request a refund. But the movie came out before, standardized entry to movie screenings. So you could just buy a ticket and go into the movie and then stay in there as long as you wanted. So people would buy a ticket after the fright break, watch the end of the movie, then just sit through the whole beginning. And then at the fright break of the next showing, they would leave and request a refund. And so when William Castle heard that people were doing this, he kept the fright break, but he introduced all these measures to shame you for leaving. Like, you had to follow a path of yellow footsteps to the door, and the door was marked Coward's Corner, and there were signs along the way that said, keep going, coward. How does it feel to be such a coward? And in the corner, you had to get checked out by a nurse, and then before you got your refund, you got a certificate that said, I am officially a coward. Just very passive-aggressive, petty measures. But Mitchell, I think it's time that you pull a prompt for our next episode.
I wasn't ready. Okay, I got it. Whoa! Oh my god! Oh, the skeleton fell from the ceiling. Oh my god! Oh my god! This is great. A film that we discussed in our first season.
Oh.
Awesome job, Christian. That is awesome.
Yes, thank you.
Okay.
Wow. Now there's a lot of flexibility here because there are films we discussed that we did not have episodes on. So you have opened Pandora's box.
I didn't even realize that I did that, but I totally did. You're right.
Were we doing the Week in Review in our first season?
I don't know.
But we were doing other stuff.
Anything's a discussion. Like if I say, oh, that movie, and you say, yeah, that movie, then that's a discussion.
I don't think you realize this is a bit of sloppy legislation, Christian.
I know. I've got to work on my my statutory drafting. Man. This is not.
I'm gonna buy some bear arms now. You're cooked.
All of Christian's prompts next season are gonna come with 15 subsections.
Oh yeah, dude, you're gonna get a whole commentary on each one. Oh my god, yeah. On one of the other prompts,
take a lot of effort. I was going to say that takes a lot of effort, so I might...
A film heretofore defined as an audiovisual presentation lasting...
You have to
all the
set out
legalese.
definitions first.
Yes, all the jargon.
Crazy.
In one of your old prompts, Mitchell, you said you could ruin anyone's day, and I think that might still be true.
The game of the game of the game of the game of the game.